All right. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to be here. I am the co-host or host for today, filling in for Katie while she is on a trip with Ethan for their honeymoon, which is super exciting. And so, for the faith and OCD theme for today, we're talking about finding light in the darkness. And we have some incredible guest speakers with us that I will hand the mic over to introduce themselves after I just tell you a little bit about me. I work in Houston and an OCD anxiety clinician. I do a lot of work with Katie. We are launching our very first podcast soon. Well, my first. Katie's already doing one in the faith and OCD world. It'll be called Obsessions and Confessions. So very entertaining, light, fun. We'll also talk about some hard stuff too, but both passionate. I'm passionate about clinical work, advocacy, working with athletes with OCD and all the things. So I'm just so excited to be here. Mavina, do you want to take it away next?
Sure. Thanks, Callie. I'm excited to be here too. Wishing Katie and Ethan well as they're celebrating their recent nuptials. I am a licensed clinical social worker in Southern California, Redondo Beach. I specialize in the treatment of OCD and anxiety disorders. I serve on the IOCDF Faith and OCD Task Force. I'm a practicing Muslim, and I love to advocate for OCD awareness in the Muslim community.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Annabella?
Yes, I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to this experience. And I am a licensed clinical social worker as well. And I'm a founder of Mindset Family Therapy in Provo, Utah. I am passionate about this work because I have a son who has OCD, and when he was little, we had a hard time finding the right therapist, and that's what motivated me to become a therapist. So here I am, and because I live here in Utah, a lot of people are members of the LDS faith, which I am as well, and I see a lot of scrupulosity, OCD, and I love the work and love it so much that I wrote a book called Imperfectly Good about scrupulosity and with skills from ACT. And I just love the work and love to help people.
I love it. I was writing down that book as you said it. Thanks for sharing. Really excited to dive in with you as well. And then Alex, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Alex. I do a lot of advocacy work with various different facets of the International OCD Foundation. And I have OCD and am also a college student at the dual degree program between Columbia University and the Jewish Theological Seminary. And I'm studying psychology. So very happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, we've got such a wide scope of knowledge for you all today. So really excited to have you all tuning in. If you want to drop in the comments, some of you already are, where you're from. I love that you guys are so on it. But remember, throughout the webinar, you can ask questions and we'll get to those. We have some questions that are formed for us as well, and this will be conversational, but let me just go over our introduction rules. So just remember, this is a live stream that's educational and not intended for or to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline, and if you are in crisis or you're ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. You can also access online at www.988lifeline.org. We want to create a safe space and be kind and respectful to everyone. At the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. And a note that is being broadcast on several social media platforms. Just remember, this is also being recorded. So you can access this later as well. So to start us off, I'm going to jump into our first discussion question that we have started this webinar webinar off with in the past. Sorry, I've been talking all day to clients and I'm just mumbling a little bit. But the first one, maybe we can go in this order. So Mabina, we'll have you answer this first one. Just what is OCD and religious scrupulosity?
Right. So OCD and religious scrupulosity, that's a really broad topic. I mean, when we talk about faith and OCD, we're talking generally how OCD can affect someone who is of a certain faith or is practicing a faith, or even people's like morality, or even atheism. So faith and OCD has a big intersection. And within that, we talk about religious scrupulosity, which is when a person's theme of OCD latches onto a person's faith practice, a person's morality, or a person's beliefs about universe, God, etc.
Yeah. I love that you bring up too that it latches onto morality, and anyone can struggle with it, even if it's not somebody that is practicing a specific religion. And I think we'll talk a bit about this from the advocacy standpoint as well. Those of us that have suffered with scrupulosity, and I know myself have struggled with it from a faith-based perspective and a moral-based perspective at the same time, and can be messy and complicated, because when you're dealing with treatment, you really have to get to the core fear to lean into the exposure work. So before I get ahead of myself, Annabella, I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about the treatment of working with scrupulosity, maybe what some of that treatment looks like.
Sure. We all know that the gold standard for treatment is ERP, exposure and response prevention. And it has shown a lot of great results. However, for myself, I'm going to speak for myself. In 2014, I discovered ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, and I just love it because it seems to me, and the research that Michael Twig and Jonathan Abramowitz did was to show that ACT can enhance ERP. And I love that because there are a lot of clients that are traumatized, let's just say, by ERP, by the idea of exposures. Oh, no, I don't do exposures. So when we do exposures, we basically are doing ACT, because ACT is an exposure modality. So when you do diffusion skills, which is our unhooking skills, something as simple as singing your thought, well, that's an exposure. So I really love ACT because it's mild and is bringing in the opportunity for the client to practice exposures, do exposures, and then the other part of the exposure part here is the value piece. A reason for why am I willing to experience this anxiety? Why am I willing to experience this uncertainty? Or yes, in the case of scrupulosity OCD, is because I want to be more connected with God. And so I am willing to sit here with the uncertainty and be open to the anxiety or guilt that creates space for this guilt, because I want to connect with God. So of course, so there's ERP, CBT with ERP, and ACT and ERP, and of course, the new kid in town is ICBT, and I've been looking at it, reading it, studying it, and in my opinion, it's like, okay, there's exposures here, and it's similar to ACT, but then don't tell anyone, because that's my view, because again, it's bringing yourself to notice and be willing to be in the present moment doing what matters most.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I also personally really like ACT, just because we know that doing exposures is hard. Your anxiety tells you to do the exact opposite of exposures, right? And so what I love about ACT is it focuses so much on values-based living and really moving towards your values. And if we keep that in mind, it can build motivation for us to really do the hard work and do the exposures, because it just helped me remember the bigger picture, right? Instead of just, how do I feel better today? How do I feel better for the rest of my life? And that
Yeah.
leads me to Alex. I would love for you to start us off with your own experience navigating faith and OCD, and then Mobina and Annabella, if you want to jump in, and you can talk about that from a personal or clinical experience as well.
Sure. So to kind of piggyback off of this point about how there's more to understanding one's relationship with OCD than just simply doing exposures. In my personal experience, things have been a little bit weird because the question I've often asked myself is this OCD, or is this just my religious practice? And what's been particularly interesting in my experience is I've connected to certain more kind of strict and traditional religious practices that some of my immediate family has not undertaken. And so they've always been tempted to say, well, this is different from what I'm doing, so is it OCD, or is it just something that you like? And ultimately, religion is incredibly meaningful to me. At college, I'm studying at the Jewish Theological Seminary for a reason. And when I go to, a Hillel over Shabbat, that's one of my highlights of my week. And I, absolutely love connecting to religious faith and ritual. So then the question is, though, where does OCD pick up in that? Because when OCD often either latches on to things that are really, we're really afraid of, sometimes even among people who do not identify with a particular religious faith, or it can also latch on to things that are really meaningful to us. And so then the question is trying to break down that barrier. And so it's definitely a process. It's a process that I've worked with my rabbi and my therapist on, separately and together. And it's, I think, a process which is complicated, but is definitely something where there are certain strategies and certain ways of kind of doing exposures which are targeting certain things, but not in violation of religious faith. And so there's a bunch of different ways of kind of doing that. And that's been really inspiring to me, is to recognize that this is actually very possible to do practically. And many therapists and faith leaders together are very open-minded and understanding about this.
Yeah, something that, that was all so beautifully said, Alex. And something that really stuck out to me that you mentioned too is the question you asked yourself: is this my faith preference, or is this my OCD? And I think any sufferer has come to that struggle at some point in their journey. And I would just want to echo that that's a part of what makes OCD work so challenging, right? Is because when we do an exposure, we don't have certainty that this is our OCD or certainty that this is a preference. And we're choosing to do the exposure and move towards values or leaning into that discomfort anyways. And so I'm really glad that you touched on that as well. And wanted to ask Mobina and Annabella, did you have anything in particular about this topic that you wanted to share?
Yeah,
I'll go ahead.
Go ahead, Annabella.
No, Mobina, go.
I just want to echo. Okay, I thank you so much. I want to just echo what Alex was saying. It takes a lot of work to kind of tease that apart. And there sometimes is an overlap. It is definitely doable to practice one's faith, even if there are rituals and obligations that are required of the faith. It's definitely possible to tease apart OCD and religion. It's a process. With my clients, I sit and I like to help them identify the flavor of their obsessions, right? Oftentimes comes along with a sense of urgency or a call to action, whereas religious practices don't always have that. If somebody knows that they have to go pray, they know they have to go pray, and it doesn't have that, I need to pray now and I must pray now in this exact way. So a lot of that is learning to recognize one's OCD. And at the same time, we're never going to know with certainty where religion ends and OCD begins. Yeah. And Annabella, please chime in.
I totally agree with you. Because I love ACT, and that's the question, right? All the time that clients ask, is it OCD? Is it my faith? Is it me? What is it? So I learned in ACT, we have the ACT matrix. Is basically just the idea of, are you moving towards your values or are you moving away from your values? And one key point is, which is confusing still, because a lot of people will say, well, I value honesty, and so I spend 10,000 hours because I value honesty. Well, that's still confusing, right? So one of the things that I do with my clients is, okay, on one side, if you're going towards your values, even if there's anxiety or there's uncertainty, is there vitality? Is there passion? Is there joy? Because again, a lot of times we do things because of purpose, vitality, etc. And then we may still feel anxious and we may still feel uncertain, but is there vitality? If there's vitality, joy, and purpose, then most likely you're moving towards your values. But on the other side, if you're going away from your values and you think you're doing your value work, but it's actually OCD and you don't realize it, the key point is, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling anxiety, I'm feeling uncertainty, guilt, shame, and there's no vitality, there's no joy. I am doing this for survival. If what you're doing is as a survival coping skill, then chances are you're moving away from your values. Because otherwise, you're going to they're going to be ruminating, right? You're going to be ruminating and obsessing about, is this OCD or is it my faith? The other part that I wanted to add is, I have had clients who are like, I respect their faith because I am of the same faith, and I know certain exposures will be very helpful. But at the end of the day, I always say, it's not about the content, the thing that we're going to expose to. Whatever it is that helps you create that anxiety or uncertainty will be good enough so you can learn willingness and create space for it. So we brainstorm about, what are you willing to do that can create the anxiety, that can create the shame. And it doesn't have to be targeting it doesn't, even though scrupulosity, I have a client that says right now, well, I'm not anxious, I don't feel guilty, but if I go back on my mission, I probably get triggered, because LDS members of the church, they go on a mission for 2 years. And so I said, you know what? Next time we meet, we're going to meet online, because I said, you're going to decide. He understands what we're going for. You're going to decide what brings that uncertainty. And it doesn't have to be related to the issue, because what we're doing is learning how to respond to the thoughts, to the feelings, to the sensations, etc.
Very well said. Yeah. And we'll get to the chat too. I love that you guys are commenting, and I'm definitely keeping up. Matt, good to see you. Charles, Kendra, your question will be first. But I want to also bring up a common topic that happens in the world of scrupulosity and OCD treatment. And it's that sometimes we have to do the exposure of stepping back from certain faith practices in order to rebuild them back into our schedule in a healthy way, right? So I remember on my own journey, there was a compulsion that I was doing where I was excessively praying, right? And I needed to, for my exposure, go a whole day without saying a prayer. And if I didn't have any education, that's the really important piece, is get some education on the OCD work and the meaning of it and the goal that it's trying to get you towards long-term, right? Of building a healthy relationship with your faith practice. But if I didn't have that education, my OCD brain was telling me, well, this is pulling you further away from your faith, right? How could a clinician ask you not to pray for a whole day? They don't understand your faith. This is really bad. And, that fear was driving the whole time, right? But the reality was, I wasn't praying to God. I was praying to my OCD the whole time anyways, right? And so I was further away from my faith because I was engaging in all of these rituals. And the goal was to be able to live with uncertainty comfortably so that I could rebuild in and have the choice to say prayers to God, not because OCD was forcing me to. And so I think that's something that we often get stuck if we're struggling with scrupulosity on our heels with, of, I don't know about this treatment thing. What if it pulls me away from faith? And if they're doing true ERP, you might have some of those fears because we're asking you to do the opposite of what your OCD wants. But just remember that the goal is to bring those things back so that you can have a stronger relationship with your faith in the end anyways.
Yeah, and something I'll add to that is a good kind of benchmark and a good way of kind of trying to understand what, therapy to focus on can be to work with a faith leader of one's particular denomination to try to understand what is normative religious practice. Although this does vary, it can be helpful. And so, for instance, as someone who identifies with Orthodox Judaism, in OCD therapy, I would, I could theoretically develop an obsession about like mixing milk and meat, but I would never eat a cheeseburger. That would be like completely in violation of my faith. And even if the idea would be, at least for me personally, and even if the idea was to help with OCD, it's something that I think would, go against kind of normative practice. However, there are certain ways in which people have, I know of specifically from, there's a clinician by the name of Jed Sieve who works with the International OCD Foundation. And, he's discussed certain ways that like Orthodox Jews have gone about doing things that are a little bit weird and a little bit uncomfortable, but still are not like in clear violation of a normative religious practice. And so that can be, I mean, what different religious practices look like is different for every individual person. But having those kinds of references between, a faith leader, between other, of your peers that have similar practices, some of these benchmarks can be very helpful and then can be piggybacked off between a faith leader and a therapist, and maybe they can be put in conversation as well if one is not sure.
I love that last part, that they can have a conversation as well, because all too often I find that someone might be doing additional therapy on the side with a specialist working in a church, right, that doesn't have any knowledge of OCD, and they're just constantly reassuring someone's OCD. And so I love that collaboration. And also, as someone struggling with OCD, it's always good to just check in with yourself of, well, why am I getting this information? Is it to make myself immediately feel better, right? Or am I, because there's a difference between educating yourself and reassuring yourself, right? Because it can be a slippery slope of getting into that reassurance trap as well. So just being careful with that. But well said, Alex. So I'm going to move us over to the chat for a moment. And I'm going to start us with Kendra's comment. Any guidance for someone converting faith? This process requires thinking deeply about the difference between doctrines, etc. However, how do you do this without getting stuck on rumination? Really great question, because I would imagine that this can be very challenging and get a little bit muddied. And I will say one thing, and then I'll have one of you maybe jump in and unmute yourself and answer as well. But I think the first part is asking yourself, where are you attaching extra meaning, right? In the OCD cycle, we see that there's a trigger or a life change or a stressor that causes this obsessive thought of, am I doing this right? Or am I doing this out of fear? And we tend to attach all this extra meaning of, well, maybe you are, or trying to figure out with certainty and answer, should I be moving faith practices? Having that 100% certainty will never come, right? And so being able to move forward with uncertainty is a really challenging piece, but doing it one step at a time, one exposure at a time, and really trying to sift through what your values are telling you along the way as well. And so there's no easy answer to that, but I'll let others take away a nugget as well if someone wanted to contribute anything.
I mean, my philosophy, I've never converted faiths, but what I have done is become closer to my particular faith. And in doing that, my philosophy has always been taking it one thing, like thing by thing, and seeing, is this meaningful? And, recognizing that the goal is not, necessarily to overnight practice this one particular way, but rather to see, is this meaningful? And, is this meaningful in kind of, an enjoyable way that's not just kind of governed by fear? And through kind of staying grounded with individual things and being very reflective in every step of the way, I think that's a very good and I think kind of mindful approach and careful approach to take. And that's been very meaningful for me.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I think I love the aspect of having advocacy journeys that help individuals realize that they're not alone too, that this is a common experience, that whether it's, like you said, someone that you're converting or not, I mean, there's a common theme here of uncertainty and anxiety that each of us are navigating through. And I would even argue whether we have OCD or not, that can make it challenging and sticky. But knowing that you're not alone is just as important. So I'm going to ask Annabella this question. Michael made a great comment, but I think we can turn it into a bit of a question. He said, such a fuzzy thing because religion is based on ritual and can be done in an obsessional way or a meaningful way or some combination. So I would love for you to speak to how religious practices have some rituals involved and how we can separate OCD from that.
For sure. I think most, if not all, religious practices have rituals one way or another, and they're there for a reason. And so that's my first thought, is like, what is the reason they're there for? And for me, those rituals, I don't have scrupulosity OCD, but for me, as a faithful member of my church, those rituals are there so that I can be closer to God, so I can connect with God, and so I can feel God's love, right? So when we're thinking about the rituals, the idea would be to connect with God. And then when scrupulosity comes in or OCD comes in, is the idea of maybe the thoughts come as, oh, I didn't do it right, I need to do it again. Let's just say prayer, right? There are some people that will take half an hour in their prayers, and every time is just needs to be just right. And I usually say, okay, let's talk about your beliefs. So we have the same beliefs, but I want to make sure, because within the same beliefs, within the same faith, people create different beliefs, right? So I want to know what the person believes. Basically, do you believe in the God I believe in, meaning all-knowing? So if you believe in that God knows everything about you, I think that God knows that you have OCD and that you're imperfect, etc. So is it possible that you could, going back to the exposure, do a different type of prayer? I ask my clients, what if you only did a gratitude prayer? Or what if you did a prayer where you acknowledge, I know that you know what my thoughts are. I don't need to say them. So I know that you know my sins, so I don't need to say them. And be your will in doing whatever you want. Of course, clients don't want to do that, right? You don't want to do that. But that's when you know the ritual itself has become a compulsion. And I always say the rituals are there for a special reason. But let's just say, going back to praying or maybe reading scriptures, right? Reading scriptures is a great thing. But if you're doing that all day, is that helpful in your life? And why are you reading the scripture? Oh, because I want God to know that I have repented, or I want to be sure that I don't have intrusive thoughts or anything like that, right? So it's an idea of, okay, missing out on the other values? And is this a value that you're living, or is this OCD? So again, the idea is the rituals are important, but in my opinion, what I invite my clients is to recognize, why is the ritual there, and are you doing it for that purpose, or are you doing it for survival? So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that was beautifully said. And Lana mentioned it's a work in progress for me anyways. And I want to validate that, yeah, for each and
It's a
every one of
process.
us. Yes, it's a process. I mean,
Come overnight.
yeah, candidly, I'll tell my own personal experience recently that I posted about on Instagram. I had a big race. I run marathons and did a race in California 2 weeks ago. And I really thought that I had no scrupulosity left. And it's funny that I say that, right? Because I'm a clinician that works with OCD, and I tell my patients that it's something that's ongoing. But I had convinced myself that, yeah, that doesn't trigger me anymore. It's really just another subtype of OCD that I experience. And sure enough, I put in my post that one of the challenges that I was really trying to hold myself accountable to was not over apologizing, because right before races, I get stuck in this, well, if I don't apologize to everyone, or if I could have offended someone, this underlying fear still exists of God might not have me do as well in this race, or the weight of this sin will weigh me down, right? And I have not had this bother me for a long time, except for when the race is really high stakes, which only happens every 2 to 3 years. And lo and behold, I thought I was going to slide through that exposure. And I had 2 or 3 times where I had to pause and say, okay, Cali, you're going to move through this. You're not going to apologize for something you don't need to apologize for, and move forward. And that's something that I think is really beautiful too, to be able to, I wanted to cross the finish line. I wanted to get the Olympic trials qualifier standard, and it didn't happen. But I ran a great time. But my ultimate race that I put in this post, and is a little bit cliche, was one because I had never done that exposure before. And it was so empowering to be able to say, wow. And I was able to do that, hold myself accountable like I hold my own patients accountable each and every day. And that was the biggest trophy, gold medal, personal record I could have ever gotten. And so I just wanted to say that, because yeah, it's a work in progress for each and every one of us that we are continuing to face. But on the day-to-day, I really want everyone to hear this message, that you can hold on to the freedom, that it doesn't have to debilitate you each and every day either. And it shouldn't, if you are continuing to work towards that life of freedom. So I'm going to ask a question from our pre-listed questions so that I can catch up in the chat again in a moment. But I'm going to move this one to Mubina and ask, why is it important to talk about mental health across faith communities?
Wow, a big question, but the first thing that comes to mind is removing stigma. OCD is not an issue of faith. OCD does not mean that somebody is weak in their faith. And OCD cannot be cured by praying harder and having a stronger faith. So it's really important that we build awareness throughout all faith communities. OCD affects all populations across race, ethnicity, nationality, faith, everything. So it's really important that people in faith communities know that OCD can affect you, and it can be treated through evidence-based practice. And it's really important that faith leaders understand and are aware of what OCD is, so that they're really at the front lines of treatment a lot of times, right? People come to them with faith questions and then asking for reassurance, or just, hey, I don't know if this is a thing. If they have awareness of OCD, they can kind of help people guide them into treatment.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think, yeah, just like your first thing you said with stigma, is that it all trickles down from there. And we live in a community where OCD is discussed each and every day. And so in our bubble, we see how much education we have, but outside of our bubble, there's so much more to learn, so much more growth that needs to happen. So I really appreciate bringing insight into that. Alex, would you want to speak a little bit to Matt's question on faith leaders and the church communities being more aware of faith scrupulosity, just like how they can have a better understanding so that they can support the OCD community?
Yeah, so to kind of also segue from what Mubina was saying, something that I believe is that faith practice can help with OCD therapy, and OCD therapy can also help someone become more connected to one's faith. And so, for instance, the Rambam, who is a very famous Jewish rabbi and thinker, talked a lot about mental health and about how, in order to have a proper connection with God, one needs to have a healthy body and a healthy mind, because those things are kind of essential, in order to be able to live and therefore practice these values. And moreover, when someone is practicing in a way that the meaning is lost because it's just dominated by fear and just stress, then, that's the kind of thing where there needs to be more of a moderation. Sometimes, it's good to have some degree of fear, but not to the extent where it makes it less meaningful. And so, to that vein, I think that mental health is a really, really essential part of faith. And specifically with faith leaders, I think that one thing that can be helpful is to have a licensed, therapist basically say something particular and kind of talk about the specific diagnosis. Even potentially, I've never personally done this, but theoretically to get the therapist and the rabbi in the same room together. Because once there's, a professional, licensed, medical professional, that I think can add a degree of credibility and can kind of help be perhaps a better factor. Specifically in this regard, also, I guess another approach could be to look at certain resources, look at certain specifics, and having specific data with that kind of ethos and credibility, I think can be a helpful element to it. I think it's important to recognize as well that the goal of OCD therapy is to help with religious practice. And similarly, religious practice can also motivate one for OCD therapy. So I think that these kinds of things are very hand in hand. Look, I can't guarantee that every single religious leader is going to respond absolutely in the most ideal way to everything. But at the same time, I think that at least given my experience and the experience I know a lot of others have had, it's actually really amazing. And there's a lot of ability both for therapists and for faith leaders to be very open-minded. So I think really trying to kind of pursue these routes and these strategies, I think is something that is very, very much worthwhile, and is something that often has helped me learn a little bit how to kind of improve that balance as well.
Yeah, gosh, I wish I could have written a book about everything you just said. It was so rich and well said, but I think you're right. I mean, in an ideal situation, having faith leaders and therapists in the same room would be such a phenomenal way to get the education almost evened out, right? Of being able to discuss how mental health practices work in the world of OCD and exposure response prevention, but also I think a lot of mental health clinicians can learn a thing or 20 about faith from faith leaders. And so, although I also like how you said, but that's not always going to happen, right? And it's challenging to make that happen. And but to your point, Alex, there are resources available. And so if a listener is someone that's suffering with OCD, I know that IOCDF's big mission is to just let everybody know that you're an advocate just by showing up to this webinar, right? You can be an advocate by sharing an article on scrupulosity with your faith leader, or vice versa, sharing an article with a clinician to help educate them. And so there's so many ways to do that. And I think there was a great comment from Valerie saying that statistics show that faith leaders are commonly the first people to go to. Absolutely. And all the more reason that education just needs to be spread. So very, very well said. Thanks for answering that. And so let's move to this next question here. As a clinician, and we'll have maybe Annabella answer this first, and then Mubina add to that as well. As a clinician, what type of struggles do you see for clients over the holidays?
Okay, so there are several things that I see, especially with scrupulosity OCD. One would be where if you are feeling like you are not worthy of joy, of God's blessings, and everybody around you is celebrating whatever holiday it is pertaining to your faith, it can feel lonely. The other problem would be where if you have scrupulosity OCD and there's guilt and relationship issues, we could, I've heard somebody said, well, my issue, and perfectionism, which is really not a good mix, right? Where I'm trying to decide what the right gift is, and then feeling guilty, is this going to be the right gift for this person? And if they don't like it, then I'm going to feel bad. So there is a lot of guilt, shame, uncertainty. It can be lonely. It can be a space where you feel lonely. And I was just thinking, and I don't know if you have noticed, a lot of the holidays in different denominations happen to be in the winter time. I looked it up out of curiosity, and different holidays for different faiths are starting in November and they continue in January and February. And I don't know if there are any holidays in the summertime. But so the problem is that people feel more depressed, the weather changes, they feel sad. I have a scrupulosity OCD group, and I asked them that question. And 3 people mentioned, I feel depressed. And then so the discussion was, what can I do about feeling depressed, etc. So it just so happens, right? But there are a lot of things that during the holidays, you will, I guess what I'm saying is your challenges maybe will be highlighted because you're going to feel like, oh, I am not feeling like everybody else. So it's very hurtful. It can be very hurtful. Did you want me to say anything else about just the challenge? Just mention the challenge?
I think that was very well said and very relatable to many of the listeners that were commenting as you were saying it. So I think that was perfect. And I want to highlight, before we move on to Mubina answering that same question with some of her experiences working with clients over the holidays, a beautiful point that Amy made in the comments, saying that a pastor was able to teach me about grace and forgiveness, which I discovered is different from what OCD says. And highlighter, exclamation point, absolutely agree, right? And Matt kind of echoed that as well by just saying he feels a lot of guilt and shame around the holidays. Just the difference with OCD is like it's a bully. It wants you to feel this guilt and shame, whereas the big part of faith is the forgiveness. And whether your pastor or a clinician is teaching you that, not just forgiveness, but grace, but also being able to recognize that some things are not considered sin, that your OCD is labeling as sin or a big mistake, right? And so that's why clarity is needed, because there's a lot of guilt and shame and baggage that OCD makes you carry around that you shouldn't be carrying around.
Right.
Mubina,
Yeah, good analogy. I use the OCD as a bully so much. It's a bully that needs to be ignored, and attention needs to be shifted away from it. And bullies will act up during times like this when it knows it can latch on. Um, Annabella, I want to let you know the weather has shifted here in Southern California. All of a sudden, it got a little cloudy outside. So yes, we're feeling it here too now. The weather is gloomy, and that's such an interesting point about the holidays being during this time of year. So happy holidays to those who celebrate, who have a holiday during this time. What I wanted to speak on, what I was thinking of is the grief that a lot of my clients come with around this time of year. The grief that people who suffer from OCD experience is very real. A lot of my clients had dreams and goals of where they wanted to be at certain points in their lives, and OCD has kept them from getting there. So they had expectations over here, and they haven't met those expectations. So we've got to process that. It's real. It's there. It does not mean that you can't get to your goals and your dreams eventually through treatment, through help, through support. But I know that a lot of people out there at this time of year that kind of marks a passage of time feel a certain way, and that's okay. Let's try to remember that another year is around the corner. It's a process, and you'll get there eventually.
Yeah. Thank you, Mobina.
Yeah.
Very great message of hope. Go ahead, Alex.
And to build off of that, I think that something that has helped me in these kinds of holidays, especially because some of them can be very intense and also are, at least in the Jewish practices that I follow, are kind of, days of judgment. Like Yom Kippur is like a 25-hour fast day for me. And so it's very intense. But something that has helped me has been, firstly, sticking with my strategies and kind of viewing these as exposures in and of themselves. But also, secondly, focusing on the kind of happier elements and the kind of joy and meaning that's kind of infused with these, special days. And as well, giving myself a little bit of space to kind of take breaks when I need it. And, not force myself to, do things, especially like over, on top of what, my peers are doing. But, kind of benchmark, use a bunch of different strategies and understand how to give myself adequate, self care and consciousness. So those are some, I think, brief things that have helped me.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, more great advice of living life as an advocate, struggling. And I wanted to just touch on a few more of the comments here. So Stacy made a great point about how there's some schools that are religious affiliated schools that would really benefit from some education on scrupulosity. And there are a ton of resources out there. And yeah, by golly, I think it's so important to educate them. And I was thinking like Peace of Mind website has a whole section on scrupulosity where there's a ton of great 2-minute long videos to watch just explaining it. Or I know the IOCDF website that Katie's put together a whole beautiful segment on scrupulosity amongst different religious practices and how it can play. So yeah, opportunities to plug that resource in, whether you have a child that goes to a school that would benefit from hearing that, or whether you're an advocate wanting to educate. I think it's very important. So let's move to, Nathan, you said that you didn't feel guilt and shame. And I think that's a good point to bring, that OCD is not a one size fits all, right? And it looks different for each and every individual. We can all have suffered in this group from scrupulosity, and there's no one person's OCD that exactly mirrors another individual's. So I'm glad you brought up that point. I want us to talk a little bit about how individuals can find light in the darkness amidst OCD struggles this time of year. So if you have specific examples, that come to mind based off religious preferences that you've worked with, that would be really helpful to include. Please include that. And I think this is a question we can all answer, and maybe go around the circle with. So we'll start, Mobina, we'll start with you, and then go to Annabella, then Alex, and then I'll add something at the end.
Right. Finding light in the darkness reminds me of choosing where to put one's attention. That's something we use a lot in OCD treatment lingo. A lot of times we put a magnifying glass on one area of our lives, and that becomes the center. And sometimes it just takes a moment to realize that that's happening, to zoom out, and to choose to shift your attention somewhere else. So I personally don't have a holiday during this time, but I love going out and looking at the lights. Okay. And it brings me joy. It brings me happiness. I put on the songs, might drink some hot chocolate. And if I just practice mindfulness in that moment, enjoying the lights, festive music, hot chocolate with loved ones, and I just take a moment and say, wow, this is so great, right? This is so great, just enjoying the love and festivity that exists in this world, right? I could do that. And then later I can go back and focus on all the stressors in life and everything, but just adding more moments into one's life, focusing literally on the light, has helped me personally.
Beautifully said.
Mm-hmm.
Annabella?
Yes, as I think about the holidays and the different faiths, the one thing we have in common with all the faiths is God and God's love, and that we believe God is love and God is light. So, as Mubina said, all those things, I think I love that too. And I'm thinking with respect to religion, the idea of recognizing that maybe if you believe in God and you know that God is love and God is light, and we are his children, then we have that light within us. But there's a problem, right? We're born into this world with lots of adversity and OCD and anxiety and all these things. And we often forget that piece, that we can be part of that love, that we can be part of that light. And even when there's OCD, again, there's not one single human being that does not have any adversities. We all have some type of adversity, but OCD can get in the way of feeling that love and feeling that light. But one thing that I know, and this can take just 2 minutes or 1 minute, I don't want to take more time, but in my religion, we have a scripture that says, when you are in the service of your fellow beings, you are only in the service of your God. And I always joke with my clients that are of the same faith, and I said, you know what? Science and research is finally catching up with the gospel, because science says that when you're doing a kind deed and when you're doing kindness, there is actually dopamine and endorphins and oxytocin getting released. And I said, well, who created us, right? God created us. So when we say serve, a lot of people with scrupulosity will say, oh, I need to do this and go and serve because God wants me to serve, because otherwise I don't get the blessings or whatever. And I said, no. It's about God has asked us to do these kind deeds so that we can feel that love and that light, so that we can feel how God feels about us. And so even though, when we are dealing with mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, OCD, most of the time we'll think, oh, I don't have energy to do that. And I tell my clients, what about a smile? What about just opening the door? I told one client today, I said, I am going to give you a challenge. I said, find out if this is true, that there is the kindness high. You know what? There's a runner's high, as you know, Cali. Well, there is that kindness that can become addicted. So I said, I want to invite you to go and do something and find out if there is something there in your brain. Because again, the idea would be, when you are in the midst of darkness, can you remember? Can this give you hope that there's light within you, there's love within you, and that never goes away, OCD or not? So that's just my thought that I have regarding that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Annabella. And Alex, your final piece.
Yeah, so Mubina, in talking about the kind of light, was kind of reminding me a little bit about my experiences with the Hanukkah candles just last week, where I have a custom to, after I light the Hanukkah candle, to spend quite a bit of time just by the Hanukkah candles. And my friends, my other friends at the Jewish Theological Seminary dorms were kind of doing the same thing. And we were kind of, hanging out by the candles, just doing, fun stuff, saying a few psalms and whatnot. And it was incredibly meaningful. And I thought that was great. And I think, for me personally, to be honest, this has been a very difficult semester just because of stuff that's been happening in the world and also within my family. And something that I've learned has been to kind of compartmentalize and to think, what is the most helpful thing that I can be doing to be helping myself and to be helping others? And where are the best ways for me to focus my effort? And I think that is very variable. And there are ways to be kind of connected to these kinds of extraneous things, but not letting them kind of bring out the worst in oneself or lead someone to kind of become overwhelmed with it. So I think, and I think this also applies to OCD challenges. So for instance, I think prioritizing these moments of having light, having hope, having happiness, and also, creating a time and a place for everything, while kind of being self-conscious about oneself and really all these different elements. I think that's important. And I think it's really important to recognize that there are going to be particular challenges, but at the same time, through taking a very balanced approach where one looks at it from a bunch of different perspectives, it is also possible to improve one's relationship to these challenges and how one responds to all these various different things, even when they're kind of happening at the same time and in kind of different ways.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to echo something you were saying too, just about helping others. I think in the past, I used to think in order to help others, I have to be fully healed, right? And none of us are fully healed. And actually, we heal by continuing to help others. Just like I said, if I'm giving my patients exposure accountability, I'm for sure going to hold myself to that accountability. But also, it's beautiful to be able to bring light to the darkness for others that have experienced that similar pain. And so thank you for saying that, Alex. And part two, I'm going to echo something Michael was saying earlier, and really love all of your comments. You guys all mean the world. Thank you for being here today. But Michael mentioned the word surrender. And that is something that is near and dear to my heart with my own OCD anxiety journey. And whether that be that I'm surrendering control over something that I'm trying to control that I have no business controlling, or whether I'm surrendering to uncertainty. There's a lot of freedom in surrender, and it doesn't mean that we can do that all at once, right? Sometimes we have to take baby steps and do a little bit at a time. But there's something beautiful about being able to find that way to release some of those responsibilities that anxiety puts on us. And so, that will be the last piece that I will leave you guys with before we jump into our closing announcements. So you all were so wonderful today. Mubina, Alex, Annabella, you're wise beyond your years. Thank you so much for being here and for making a difference in the OCD community. It means the world to every single listener. And to all of our listeners, thank you for your incredible comments, questions. This was such an engaging talk tonight. It makes it all that much more fun and meaningful for us. So appreciated. So we'd love to hear from you. I think it was Charles that asked how to get more involved. And there's a link to the Becoming a Grassroots Advocate that's in the chat. So feel free to click on that. But here's some other ways you can get involved. Take our live stream survey to tell us what you'd like to see on the platform. We'd love your feedback, and the survey can be found at iocdf.org/livestream survey. Camp registration is now open, so register today to join the special event for youth with OCD and their families. You can register at iocdf.org/camp. And did you know that the online OCD conference content is available for 60 days after the conference? So it's not too late to experience online OCD Con. Just visit iocdf.org/online-OCD-Con for more. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This live stream is one of many, so you can find the entire schedule of future live streams at iocdf.org/livestreams. You can also view this recording and many other past live streams to watch host answer your pre-submitted questions from the OCD mailbag on IOCDF's YouTube channel, youtube.com/IOCDF. Remember to like and subscribe to get notified when live streams are scheduled, and sign up for IOCDF news and updates at iocdf.org/signup. If you need resources or are looking for a therapist, please visit iocdf.org. We've got upcoming live streams Wednesday, December 20th, and Ask the Experts at 12 Eastern, and then January 3rd, another Ask the Experts at 12 Eastern. So until then, everyone, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful holiday season.